Welcome to Roll for Insight, the D&D podcast where we dive into the game, the lore, and the internet's favorite arguments. Grab your dice and your character sheet, and let's roll for insight. Hello, welcome to Roll for Insight. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the origin feat, Skilled, out of the 2024 D&D Player's Handbook. So, Skilled is an origin feat that is available at character creation by choosing either the Charlatan, Noble, or Scribe origin, or by choosing it as a feat when you level up. Also, if you're using a background or origin from an older D&D version that doesn't provide a feat, you can take this as an origin feat of your choice. Now, this one might take the gold for being known as the most boring feat, but it's important that we don't overlook it. So, in this episode, we'll be covering the description of the origin feat from the Player's Handbook. We'll review some gameplay uses, plus some benefits and limitations of the feat. We'll pull some ideas and opinions from the internet, and last, we'll end with some fun fact information about the feat. Okay, first topic. The origin feat Skilled is available to the following origins: Charlatan, Noble, and Scribe. You gain proficiency in any combination of 3 skills or tools of your choice. It's repeatable, so you can take this feat more than once. Now, a few clarifications on the description. Skilled looks extremely simple, and it is, but the value of this feat depends almost entirely on what you choose and what your table emphasizes. It gives you any combination of any 3 skills or tools. So you gain proficiency in 3 skills, 3 tools, or any mix of both. So these can be skills you don't already have or tools you don't already have. You can't gain proficiency in something you're already proficient in unless your DM allows retraining, which would be table dependent, so you can't double it up to get expertise or anything like that. This flexibility is the entire point of the feat. Now, looking at the repeatable nature of this, it is important because you can take Skilled more than once, and each time you gain 3 additional proficiencies. And that means that a character can become extremely broad. You could cover most of the skills list over time, but you're giving up a lot of other feats to do so. So this one's really about expanding your skill set wide and not a strict power or combat oriented feat. Keep in mind there's also no scaling to this feat, but it also doesn't expend any action economy. So there's no scaling because it doesn't scale with proficiency bonus, it doesn't improve later on, it doesn't give you any sort of advantage or expertise. However, it also doesn't modify your action economy usage. It simply increases the number of situations where you can roll with proficiency. And depending on your campaign, that's either going to be very strong or barely noticeable. So it's likely worth a conversation at your table about how your campaign will run if you're not sure about it. Now, looking at some gameplay uses, Skilled is one of the most campaign-dependent origin feats in the book. Now, when we're talking about exploration uses, this is where Skilled can really stand out, because you can cover missing party gaps like handling traps with sleight of hand, or tracking and survival or investigation checks. So it can really help contribute meaningfully to a lot of things that are outside of combat. And it's going to be especially strong when your party lacks the rogue-style character or if you're in a very skill-heavy campaign. And it will be very beneficial if you have a DM who likes to call for all sorts of different varieties of checks too, and not just sticking with the common ones. So Skilled really increases the amount of times that you get to say, yes, I can roll for that. Now, looking at a couple particular social uses, Skilled is really excellent in social campaigns and campaigns that call for a lot of different knowledge checks. Because if you're picking skills like the persuasion, deception, intimidation, the insights, the performance checks, arcana, history, nature, it really reinforces the jack of all trades type character, and it can really fit well into the noble or the charlatan characters that can help reinforce the identity of having a broad skill set. Now, looking directly at the tool proficiency uses too, tool proficiencies are often overlooked, but tools can start making you look at different and unique ways to solve problems, because each tool has a special utilize function, and many have a crafting function built into them. So, forgery kits, for example, you can forge documents. Disguise kits, you can apply makeup or craft costumes. A poisoner's kit lets you detect poisons or craft basic ones. Having thieves' tools allows you to pick locks and disarm traps, and then the variety of artisan's tools, you can pick up all sorts of neat tricks. So at tables that actually use tool proficiencies, this can dramatically widen your options. And at tables that don't, it might never come up. Now, there's a lot of proficiencies that you can take with skilled that don't directly affect combat, but they can be combat adjacent. So things like having perception proficiency can affect whether or not you spot ambushes. Athletics checks can affect your grappling. Stealth proficiency can affect your positioning and your surprise rounds, and medicine proficiency can affect stabilizing your allies. So while it doesn't boost your damage directly, it can affect how combat starts and then how it plays out. So there are a lot of benefits here because the benefit is in itself the flexibility that the skill feat lets you unlock. And in a campaign or at a table where skill checks are frequent, then this is going to be a great fit. Helping to fill in party gaps or being the backup character with an ability is also very useful because skilled makes you useful more often, not specifically more powerful. However, again, limitations, this is where the expectation setting is important. Because if your table rarely calls for skill checks or doesn't really dip into tool use, then you probably won't find much value. And if your plan is to be the backup character, it's possible that you're never going to be the main character in a situation, and your feat selection might feel invisible. You also might lose some relative value at higher levels when more characters start unlocking things like expertise features, and there's more options for magical solutions rather than skill checks, or when the skill DCs increase. Now, looking at a few discussion board topics from the internet, skilled has a very specific reputation online for being the boring feat, and that's probably the most common take because it doesn't add damage or add hit points or give you options for rerolls or unique abilities. It just gives proficiency, and a lot of players skip it for that reason. And I can see that as a fair criticism, but boring doesn't necessarily mean bad, so it is worth consideration. There's quite a few arguments that this should just be a background feature as well, because proficiencies are too minor to justify spending an entire feat on it, especially compared to some of the combat feats. But in some cases, having flexibility is the power, especially in campaigns where skill checks are frequent. So this debate usually shows just how much different tables value the combat versus the non-combat side of play. Now, there are some people who are crunching the numbers, pointing out that expertise is better. And that is true. Mathematically, expertise is going to be stronger. However, skilled gives you a broader range, and expertise is narrower but deeper. And that means skilled is about covering more abilities, not dominating a few of them. Plus, keep in mind, taking expertise isn't an option for an origin feat, so it's not like you're choosing between taking proficiency over expertise. Now, to wrap things up, the fun fact information, skilled really plays into the idea of a well-rounded adventurer who's picked up a little bit of everything. It's that jack of all trades, master of none archetype. Now, in earlier editions like 3.5, you would actually gain a certain number of skill points for each new level, depending on which class you chose, plus or minus a few modifiers, and then they were allocated individually. So basically you were spending your skill points, and that would be weighted differently depending on your class's skill proficiencies. So you could spread yourself out really thin, or you could hyper-focus on different areas depending on the build you're going for. And 5e dramatically simplified this system into proficiency, expertise, and background-driven skills, and then paring down the overall number of skill options to choose from. So where this really leaves our skilled origin feat here, again, it's not flashy, it's not going to spike your damage, you're not going to be dominant on the battlefield because of it, and it's not really about being the best. It's about never being useless and always having some sort of trick up your sleeve. Well, that's it for this session of Roll for Insight. Thanks for listening, and thank you to all our supporters on patreon.com/rollforinsightpodcast. And we will see you next time.